Hello and welcome. You're watching World Today with me, Geeta Mohan. After French President Emmanuel Macron, the UK Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer is visiting Washington. Starmer will try to push a reluctant US President Donald Trump to provide a US backstop to prevent Russian President Vladimir Putin from launching a fresh assault on Ukraine after any peace deal that might come out of the ongoing process. The UK Premier is prepared to commit British troops to a peacekeeping mission, but that, he believes, US promises are vital to deter Putin, but they are deter Putin from coming again. But the fact is that not only for Ukraine, the British Prime Minister wants a new partnership with the US for trade and investment between the two countries. Here's what he said right before his talk with Donald Trump.
So we want to strike a new partnership. We share the view that our best days lie ahead. And, you know, taking out a chainsaw isn't quite my style. But we are stripping away red tape and bureaucracy. We are reforming permitting, getting things built, reducing barriers to investment and growth. And we're open for business, open for investment. And we're determined to help US innovators thrive in the United Kingdom. So my message is we want to work with you, we want to welcome you to Britain, we want a new partnership, because our history shows that when we work together, great things happen.
Right after British Prime Minister, you'd also have Ukrainian President Zelensky, who would be in Washington on Friday to meet President Trump. And the first big step to a peace deal would be a deal on access to rare earth minerals in Ukraine. And right after his Washington visit, Zelensky would also be meeting European leaders over the weekend. It is going to be a Super Friday in the road to a peace deal for Ukraine and also for Ukrainian resources.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is on his way to America to sign an agreement on rare earth minerals. The US president is waiting for him.
This deal could be a great success or it could pass quietly, and the big success depends on our conversation with President Trump.
President Zelensky is going to be coming on Friday. That's now confirmed, and we're going to be signing an agreement which will be a very big agreement. And I want to thank Howard and Scott for the job you guys did in putting it together. Really did an amazing job. And that'll be on rare earth and other things.
Ukraine floated the idea of opening its critical minerals to investment by allies last autumn. This was part of a victory plan that sought to put it in the strongest position for talks and force Moscow to the table. Zelensky said less than 20% of Ukraine's mineral resources, including about half its rare earth deposits, were under Russian occupation. And to stress his point further, he added that Moscow could open those resources to its allies, North Korea and Iran, both of which are sworn US enemies. Most of the titanium deposits were marked in northwestern Ukraine, far from the fighting. But Zelensky has emphasized that Kiev was not proposing giving away its resources, but offering a mutually beneficial partnership to develop them jointly.
I'm dealing with President Zelensky. I'm dealing with President Putin. I'm trying to get the money back that, or secured, because, you know, Europe has given $100 billion. The United States has given $350 billion because we had a stupid, incompetent president and administration. 350. But here's worse. Europe gave it in the form of a loan. They get their money back. We gave it in the form of nothing. So I want them to give us something for all of the money that we put up.
In the backdrop of this much-awaited meeting between the two presidents of Ukraine and America, diplomatic delegations of US and Russia met for the second time in Istanbul to chalk out a roadmap for the possible peace deal.
First, contacts with the new US administration give certain hopes. There is mutual determination to work restoration of relations between two countries.
The US has already indicated that security guarantees for Ukraine will mainly be made by Europe, not the United States. But Ukraine wants US security guarantees. Kiev views it as vital for its war against the Russian invasion.
Mr. President, on Ukraine, can you talk a little bit about what type of security guarantees you're willing to make?
Well, I'm not going to make security guarantees beyond very much. We're going to have Europe do that because it's in, we're talking about Europe as the next door neighbor. But we're going to make sure everything goes well.
This agreement could be part of future security guarantees. But I want to understand, an agreement is an agreement. But we need to understand the broader vision. What lies next for Ukraine? Where are we in all of this?
Friday, the 28th, is going to be a crucial one in the road to peace in Ukraine. Bureau Report, India Today.
Well, what's at the heart of all of this? What is at the heart of this is the Ukraine-US deal, which is access to rare earth materials and minerals. It is central to Kyiv's push to win Washington over. Volodymyr Zelensky has said that Ukraine has Europe's largest reserves of two very essential minerals, titanium and uranium, among others. Now, what is a rare earth mineral? There are 17 silvery white rare earth minerals, and they are not uncommon in the Earth's crust. The elemental forms of rare earths are iron grey to silvery lustrous metals that are typically soft, malleable and ductile, and usually reactive, especially at elevated temperatures or when finely divided. They're difficult to mine, making them relatively expensive. So why is it important, not just for Ukraine but for the world? Mineral deposits that are economically viable are more difficult to find, and the real rarity comes in the complex process to separate them into the materials needed to produce permanent magnets used in a range of critical products. Right now, China accounts for about 60% of global rare earth mine production, but its share jumps to 90% of processed rare earths and magnet output. Now, what are these important minerals? Most important of all are titanium and uranium. Like I said before, titanium is essential for the aviation and space industry, and uranium is used for nuclear energy and weapons. So, in essence, we can say rare earths are important in the manufacture of high-performance magnets, electric motors, consumer electronics, and wind turbines. In fact, electric vehicles and wind turbines are the two main areas dividing demand in the coming years. Now, the question is, why are these so crucial in a peace deal? Listen to the experts.
Because even though the global rare earth supply continues to be relatively stable, with a few exceptions, rare earth elements, because of their strategic significance, do unfortunately tend to feature in broader geopolitical disputes. And so the elements that are under question with respect to Ukraine are currently located in areas that are Russia controlled. Right. And so gaining or regaining access to those deposits, not only for the US, for Ukraine and Western allies, is something that has larger geopolitical significance.
The US-Ukraine critical minerals deal is interesting because it's the first big deal of the Trump administration with respect to Ukraine, right? I do believe that to a certain extent it has been a bit exaggerated, right? I think Ukraine has a lot of interesting hydrocarbon resources, oil, gas, coal, right? On the critical mineral side of the equation, however, they have resources, but that doesn't necessarily mean that those can be extracted profitably. So there was a lot of talk about lithium and rare earths. And actually, those deposits, the information we have about them is from the Soviet era, we don't really know how reliable that is. We don't know how interesting those deposits are.
Well, Keir Starmer is in Washington, D.C. in moments from now. He will be meeting with President Trump. But to discuss more on what this really means for Ukraine, I'm being joined by Michael Busakil, who is a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council's Eurasia Center. He's based out of Odessa in Ukraine, knows exactly what's happening on the ground, is also why are countries scrambling for Ukrainian resources. Michael, thank you so much for joining me from Ukraine. Now, this is a race when the West is coming together to look at Ukrainian rare earth minerals. In all this, how compromised would Zelensky be, the economic independence of Ukraine really be in this entire case?
Yes, good to be with you again, Gita. Well, let's go back a few months when Zelensky was the one who proposed a deal for rare earth elements in his so-called peace through strength proposal to Mr. Trump. That was even before Mr. Trump was inaugurated. So in a way, they kind of shot themselves in the foot from the get-go because they mentioned this with quite great fanfare. They also have said in places like the Davos Forum and here in Ukraine, they're screaming loudly that Ukraine is open for business. But what a lot of Ukrainians are asking, of course, and legitimately, is we're open for business, but at what cost? And that setup report was fantastic. You correctly pointed out that Ukraine does have a lot of these rare earth elements. However, I was with the OSCE in 2014, 2015. We scoped out a lot of the Donbass area where these minerals are supposedly under the ground. And the infrastructure even back then was in really, really bad shape before a lot of the bombing and destruction happened. So, it'll be interesting to see what they promised to the Americans. We have seen a draft of the agreement, but I'm also wondering how Mr. Trump sees any immediate payback that he can flip to brag to his base on what he's done, because it's going to take a long, long time to extract these rare earth elements. And I'm beginning to think that could go down as a geopolitical miscalculation on behalf of Mr. Trump, who, by the way, has not been doing well in the Middle East and elsewhere.
You think it's a miscalculation on Trump's part or maybe on Zelensky's part too? I ask this, Michael, is because going back in history, this almost feels like a post-Iraq invasion scrambling for resources, where we are looking at the United States of America, we're looking at European countries, Britain, France, Germany, all of them are looking at those rare earth minerals in Ukraine. And similarly, we saw that in Iraq as well. So is this a miscalculation by Trump alone or primarily by Zelensky? What's happening on the ground in Ukraine? Are people upset?
I was about to mention it could be very damaging for Mr. Zelensky, who is under pressure to, take another look at martial law, elections, that sort of thing. But I think the key point to be made here on the ground, how people feel, is that they're looking at all of these really fast-moving developments and saying, well, wait a minute, this was not a loan. This was, this was something that was given to Ukraine, all of that military weaponry to help Ukraine push back Russia, not only for Ukraine's sake, but for the rules-based international order for European and U.S. security. No one talked about paying it back. And Ukrainians also well understand that a lot of this aid actually stayed in the United States, creating jobs and wealth at ammunition factories and that sort of thing. So there's a sense of betrayal here that they're having to pay back for a war they've been waging, again, not only for themselves, but for the West too. And I don't think that's something Mr. Trump gets. And the sense of betrayal here is very, very deep on that score.
Also, Michael, people are forgetting the Russia factor. I mean, you can do all these conversations. Will Putin take this lying down? Will he allow, so to say, them to really enter and exploit Ukrainian resources? He was against NATO. He was against any footprint, Western footprint in Ukraine, and look what happened. Will he allow this?
Yeah, well, as your report pointed out at the top, Russian and U.S. negotiators met today in Istanbul, and I'm sure this was already starting to come up because much of these resources are in Russian-controlled or Russian proxy-controlled territories, and also in Zaporizhzhia and Kherson oblasts, which Mr. Putin wants to get all of these oblasts in their entirety. They only control part of them. So a deal will have to be made with them as well for these resources if that land is to stay in Russian hands. Lord only knows what the two sides are negotiating right now, but the feeling here is that the way things are going right now, talks between the U.S. and Russia without the Ukrainians at the table is in a very lopsided way, and Ukraine could get the short end of the stick.
Well, Michael, stay on with us. I'm also being joined by our managing editor, Gaurav Sawant. Gaurav, taking the very same question to you that I asked Michael earlier, how compromised could Ukraine's sovereignty be by the end of all the meetings that he would have either with Trump or the European Union leaders and many others who are looking to and looking at Ukrainian resources?
It's a very tough situation for the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky as he interacts with the US President Donald Trump in Washington, D.C. because Trump has made it very clear he wants that rare earth deal, and he wants a deal that is heavily tipped in favor of the United States of America. Does Ukraine hold any aces in this? It does appear extremely tough for him because Europe may be able to say they will provide security guarantees or they may want to help Ukraine, but can they without America's help? Look at the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. America is putting a lot of pressure on countries, not just Germany, but across NATO members to spend more, to contribute at least 2.5 to 3% of their GDP to defense. So if they have to look after themselves, they would need much more if they have to look after Ukraine's interests and be strong enough to take on Russia. So very clearly, while they may stand tall with Ukraine, and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is also likely to travel to the United Kingdom, interact with Keir Starmer in the UK, how much will emerge from all these meetings remains to be seen, with America holding almost all aces.
Okay, let me just go back to Michael then. Michael, we were discussing approvals. You are in Ukraine. Zelensky has strength, but he will require approval in parliament as well. And even if he gets approval in parliament, are people okay? Is this acceptable to the people of Ukraine? How does this really work out? Is his popularity dwindling? Has war fatigue set in?
Great questions. But I just got to say one thing, and then I'll go to the answer, is that the other betrayal the Ukrainians feel, and a big signal from the United States, that this isn't just Trump talking about Ukraine and Russia. It's a fundamental shift in foreign policy. What happened in the UN the other day when the United States actually pressed for a resolution that did not criticize Russia that harshly? It wanted to call this a conflict, not a war. It did not address Russian aggression or call for Russian troops to leave. That's number one. But number two, yeah, in terms of the potential cost for Mr. Zelensky, right now in the draft agreement, there's no firm security guarantees from the United States. All it says is that this will be something that will be discussed in the future. I'm not quite sure Zelensky can come back to Ukraine with that sort of deal, promising, 50% of minerals under the ground with very little in return, especially as what I told you is Ukrainians feel they've given so much already in terms of deaths of men and women at the front line, civilian deaths in the tens of thousands, massive destruction, massive displacement. The cost here that has been paid has already been beyond whatever anyone ever expected. Why should more come out of their pockets or out of their goodwill?
Right. Michael, stay on with us. Now, the larger picture, let's zoom out. A lot of reports that we've seen in the recent past has to do with whether Russia is doing well or not and how Russia has been squeezed or isolated. Well, Russia's economy has survived the worst the West could throw at it. More than 3 years after the Ukraine war began, Russia's economy is still going strong. But how did Russia avoid an economic collapse? Moscow made use of one major economic weapon and two of the world's most powerful economies. This is a report from our bureau.
Russia should have collapsed. That's what the world expected when the West hit Moscow with over 500 sanctions after it invaded Ukraine. A war that was meant to last weeks has now dragged on for 3 years. And yet, Russia's economy is not just surviving, but thriving. But how? The real story isn't just about the battlefield. It's about money, oil, and global power shifts. So, how did Russia dodge economic collapse? The answer lies far from Moscow, in Beijing and New Delhi. While the US and Europe turned their backs, China and India stepped in as financial lifelines, ensuring that Russia never ran out of cash to fund its war. Despite facing the harshest Western sanctions in modern history, Russia's GDP grew by 3.6% in 2023 and 24, according to the International Monetary Fund. And here's an even bigger shock. Russia's GDP, based on purchasing power parity, surged from $5.73 trillion in 2021 to $6.91 trillion in 2024. This was not supposed to happen. The West believed that cutting off trade with Russia, especially energy trade, would sink its economy. But Putin had a backup plan. The key to Russia's survival? Oil. Russia's biggest asset isn't its nuclear weapons or military strength. It's crude oil. And when the West stopped buying, China and India stepped in. In 2023 alone, China bought $129 billion worth of Russian goods, making up 32.7% of Russia's total exports. India followed with $66 billion, accounting for 16.8% of Russian exports. Together, China and India made up 50% of Russia's total exports, a staggering increase from just 16% in 2021. For China, buying Russian oil was nothing new. But for India, this was a massive shift in strategy. Back in 2013, crude petroleum made up just 1.8% India's total imports from Russia. In 2021, that number was only 12%. By 2024, 74% of India's total imports from Russia were crude petroleum. With Western countries refusing to buy Russian crude, Moscow started offering massive discounts. India, the world's third largest oil importer, jumped at the chance, saving billions while keeping its economy stable. For India, this was a win-win. But for Russia, this was more than just trade. It was economic survival. Now with Donald Trump trying to broker peace by leveraging a minerals deal with Ukraine, the war will pause sooner or later. But the economic battle will continue. With China and India firmly in its corner, Moscow has rebuilt its economy, shifted away from Western dependence, and strengthened ties with the global South. Sanctions haven't crushed Russia, they've reshaped it. A ceasefire may end the fighting, but it will also mark the beginning of a whole new world order. And that's a reality the West might not be ready for. Bureau Report, India Today Global.
Michael, coming back to you, it seems at this point in time, no matter who goes Kremlin talking to Trump, whether it is Emmanuel Macron, who actually had the guts to correct him in front of the media, in front of cameras, or it's Keir Starmer right now, Zelensky later, and many other European leaders to follow. At the end of the day, what we're looking at is this is advantage Putin for now.
Yeah, it's going to be so interesting in the next few hours to watch Mr. Starmer and then tomorrow, reportedly, Mr. Zelensky in front of Mr. Trump. because I think if you take the example of Mr. Macron and the Japanese leader, they did their homework and they know exactly how to get Trump back home with the cost of foodstuffs and things like that. So he needs a very, very big foreign affairs win, perhaps, to distract people. Geeta, if I can go back for a second to that very excellent reporting, I compliment your team for their forthrightness reporting about India-Russia relationships. But if I'm not mistaken, India also allowed Russia, also was able to pay Russia in local currency. So that's a big difference. And in terms of buddies of Russia, we also have to throw in there Tehran and, of course, North Korea. Tehran supplying thousands and thousands of drones that strike us here in Ukraine every night, and Pyongyang, lots of ammunition and lots of soldiers. And very quickly, Russian defense minister was just recently in Jakarta trying to refresh their relationship, especially on the military side. So lots of activity of Russia in the global south right now.
Right, Michael, thank you so much for joining us. We'll keep coming back to you. You're in Ukraine. There are a lot of developments happening on that front. And for all the continued coverage, you can log on to the India Today Global YouTube channel. Our continuous coverage on the Russia-Ukraine war and what's happening with the West continues there. That's all in this edition of World Today. Thank you for watching. Goodbye and take care.